Okay, mill clamps, clamping down. Seems fairly simple. You have a T-nut, which should match your table. You have a bolt or a stud, and you have some kind of a clamp. And it is relatively simple, but there's just a couple things about it here. So, real common clamps are these ones. They come in different lengths, different slot lengths. And one of the ways that you will balance the back out is there's little stair step pieces. So grab one up, step blocks. You have a step block back here so that you can set where this clamp's at. And I'm going to go to extremes. I'm going to leave this low. And you can see, of course, how it hits just on the edge. So you normally don't want to do that. That's going to tend to make your part to where if it moves at all, it would get loose because it's moving away from the wedge. And also, you're just clamping on the edge. If this is not absolutely flat, it's going to try and pick it up. So what you really want to do, ideal would be like, you know, turn this the other way so it's not so bad, but you try to come out a little ways and you want your clamp going down so it hits in a spot. So that underneath this, we're pushing down on the square part of the block that we're clamping. And we're not going to work on these or hardened setup block that I happen there. But what brought this to mind as a discussion dimension on machining is you see what I'm doing here. I am not using step blocks, which we could use step blocks and get a more accurate positioning with this being straight up and down or near to it. But it really doesn't matter in this case. A couple of reasons. One is that this shaft is in a V. It's not just laying flat. And if it was just laying flat, we'd have to do something different to keep it from wanting to move. We would want to put a block against it, put it in a V block, which we have. And in fact, Austin started to set this up for me, and then I decided not to be lazy and just do it on my own, and he had brought out the V blocks, and not realizing that we did have enough room to get in there, and I had to check and make sure we did, because it's right on the borderline whether there's enough height to get down and stick out with the end mill to cut our keys on the side or not. So the V blocks would allow you to do that if you didn't have room in the key in the T-slots of the mill, because I can bring this forward more.
Right.
I can bring this right out to the edge and then clamp down on my shaft. And anyway, and the other thing is I don't have an edge to clamp on with this. This is not a square block. So again, if this was a square block on the top with a V, I still would want to try and get it to where I was in the center and pushing down on that flat spot, as opposed to trying to hit just one side and it wants to roll the shaft if I had a flat spot. But I don't have a flat spot, so the fact that there's a little more pressure one side than the other, and it happens to be in the direction that the cutting should be working against, but you never know for sure, because the cutter, at the same time you have a cutting pressure to start into the cut, you also have the helix that tends to pull against the part. You have both forces on this one here, and in fact that's another point, but in a different discussion as to using our end mill. But you can get creative in your clamping. Another thing too, when you're clamping, let's say that you have something you need to clamp and it's like this. Most of it is sitting there, it's flat. You have it sticking out here, and a really good example of this is the slant 6 machining that Austin did, where he had set up step clamps in here and then he clamps on top of it. So you've got this positioned, and you just have to be really careful. You let your main square part, whatever it is, decide where this sets, and then you just bring it up to where it touches and you tighten on the other part, so you're not moving it but just tightening it. Now what you can do sometimes, or what you need to do, is you may not know if you're tightening this, bringing it down a little, or if the jack is bringing it up a little bit. So if it's really rigid and you need to go here rather than going by feel, put an indicator on it. And then the dial indicator will tell you if you are tweaking it up or down. And what you'll normally do is you'll take your block, your jack underneath, and you'll jack this up a little bit, maybe read 1 or 2 thousandths on the indicator, and then tighten it down until it comes back to the 0 you started at. And relatively simple, but you could cause yourself all kinds of problems. Real simple one, people starting out, is just that clamping on the edge. And they don't do it like this, but you do it just barely where you don't see it, and it happens to be something where there's not a lot of surface area. It doesn't happen to set right anyway, and all of a sudden your part's lifting up. Especially if all your clamping is on one side. It really, really doesn't work well.
Cool.
Yep.